What conspiracy theory has a high chance of being true? Story 1. The Sphinx is undoubtedly not dated correctly. Our understanding of the rise of civilization is way off, and it's all because of the egos of the archaeological and Egyptological communities. Textbooks would have to be rewritten, careers would be ruined. Thankfully, the internet and people's own good judgment is very helpful in revealing this atrocity of a lie. Edit. For those interested, here's my best summarization of the evidence to support the incorrect dating of the Sphinx. Biggest claim is that extensive water erosion occurred on the enclosure walls and back of the Sphinx that would date back to the end of the last ice age, when there was heavy rainfall and lots of water in the area, about 11 to 12,000 years ago, which is much further back in history than current claims by Egyptologists. Story 2. New or original Coke. Apparently American Coca-Cola was made with sugar up until the 80s, but they wanted to change to a cheaper ingredient known as HFCS. Not wanting to make the change and having people in an uproar over the change in taste, Coca-Cola made New Coke, which tasted completely different, which did indeed cause criticism. The sneaky part is, they said, "Yep, New Coke is a failure. Here's your beloved original Coca-Cola back, except now that Coca-Cola is made with the cheaper HFCS and tastes different to original sugar Coke, but still better than New Coke." Story 3. On August 5th, 1952, a car came to pick up Samira Musa in Berkeley, California. The driver opened the door for the world-renowned scientist, who was the first ever female Egyptian nuclear scientist. The 35-year-old was the first woman to earn a doctorate in atomic radiation and the first woman to hold a teaching post at Cairo University, thanks to her groundbreaking PhD in atomic radiation in the 1940s. Musa sat in the back seat as they left the city and headed along the California coast. She had completed her research and was preparing to return to Egypt, but she had received an invitation for a dinner. Driving along the curved cliffs of the Pacific coast, the car suddenly swerved and plummeted 40 feet over the edge, ending her immediately. The driver jumped from the car just before the fall and later disappeared, and the invitation she received to California turned out to be fake. The death of the brilliant young physicist is shrouded in mystery. While no one knows for sure what happened, some suspect that it was targeted by an intelligence agency to prevent Egypt from acquiring knowledge of nuclear technology, though it has never claimed responsibility. Story 4. That the term conspiracy theorist was coined by the CIA to make a mockery of people who put facts together out of the loop of mainstream media to see what was happening behind the scenes. That turned into flat earthers, reptilian royals, and whatever else, falling under the same umbrella and skewering the public perception of theorists. Many theories prove true, CIA funneling drugs into the USA, but they fall under the umbrella as moon landing fake, so people don't really pay attention. Story 5. That Diana Ross and Smokey Robinson are Michael Jackson's actual parents. That's why he was the talent in the Jackson family, and why there were rumors that he was Evan Ross's father. They both look like Diana. Smokey would have been 18 and Diana 14 years old when Michael was born, so Berry Gordy arranged to have the kid given to his old boxing buddy and fellow musician from Chicago, Joe Jackson, who he would fund leading to the formation of the Jackson 5. Joe had a big family where Michael would get everything he needed while training him to be an entertainer, and Motown could protect their image by taking the child out of the picture. Story 6. This may get buried, but it's an interesting thing I found out from my family. I'm not sure if this is 100 true, but it's a conspiracy theory from within my own family. I'm a US citizen, and I'm originally from the state of Maryland. My grandfather on my father's side, Jack Davis, was a scientist at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland. For those of you unaware of the history of it, Fort Detrick at one point was a huge chemical weapons and government science center. My grandfather helped find the cure for anthrax. Here's a link below to a bit of an article invoking the research. Story 7. During the last federal election in Brazil, a far-right candidate for the presidency was stabbed during a rally. This candidate was from a small party and did not have time on television to promote himself, less than 30s, but after that it was in the news. Also because of the stabbing, he was on medical leave and did not participate in any debates between candidates. The main doctor from the team that operates a candidate was a well-known oncologist in Brazil. Well, the candidate was Bolsonaro, and the stabbing boosted his campaign and he won. After the election, the guy who stabbed was declared with mental issues and is on special hospital jail, while we discover that he was practicing gunfire in the same school or field as Bolsonaro's son, which this guy clearly could not pay for, and had a high-profile lawyer, again, who was paying for this. The conspiracy theory is Bolsonaro had cancer and created the circus to operate while boosting his chances on the election. Story 8. The government intentionally fuels the racial divide in America. The more why y'all keep fighting amongst yourselves and looking at each other as the enemy, the more they get away with messing with you all over with little to no consequences. As Carlin says, now to balance the scale, I do like to talk about some things that bring us together, things that point out our similarities instead of our differences, cause that is all you ever hear about in this country is our differences. That is all the media and the politicians are ever talking about. The things that separate us, things that make us different from one another. That is the way the ruling class operates in any society. They try to divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and middle classes fighting with each other so that the rich, can run off with all the money. A fairly simple thing happens to work. You know, anything different, that's what they're going to talk about. Race, religion, ethnic and national background, jobs, income, education, social status, anything they can do to keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank. You know how I describe the economic and social classes in this country? The upper class keeps all of the money, pays none of the taxes. The middle class pays all of the taxes, does all of the work. The poor are there just to scare the crap out of the middle class. Keep on showing up at those jobs. Story 9, a small local one. We have some allotments, small gardening plots, owned by locals near my house, which have been there for so many years, built on the site of an old rail station along a rail line not used since the 1920s. Recently, there was a big fire, ruled accidental, which razed the whole site to the ground. The very next day, our local council announced plans to reopen the line, as they could get a national grant from coronavirus or business funds to do so. They faced considerably less objection from the public to the plans than they would have had the allotment still been in use. Take from that what you will. Story 10, Alien Zoo Theory. There are so many Earth-like planets in this galaxy alone that it's near impossible for them not to exist. It's also estimated that it would only take on average 3 million years from the birth of a planet for it to form a civilization. But then that raises the Fermi paradox. If they exist, where are they? And the answer to that, and the theory I'm talking about, is the Zoo Earth theory. One theory that could well be true is that aliens have found Earth and are observing, waiting for us to develop further, and that in this process, they are enforcing some sort of quarantine, prohibiting other alien species from making contact, or us from finding them. Story 11. The opioid epidemic is a targeted purge of economically depressed and potentially rebellious regions of the country. Back in the 90s, NAFTA killed small to mid-scale manufacturing in the Rust Belt and Appalachia. Those industries have always been where the majority of the people in those areas worked. This left a lot of angry people. They are still angry, so much so that they hate Hillary Clinton because Bill signed NAFTA into law, and that is why we've had crap for brains in the White House messing up the country the past 3 years. But I digress. These are also areas that are traditionally anti-authority, especially Appalachia, and they are areas where people have guns and know how to use them. So what are you going to do with these people? They refuse to retrain for the new economy. They were starving, they rearmed, and they have a pretty legitimate grievance. You are going to need to get them under control if you want to stay in power. So Pharma and whoever tells the FDA to rubber stamp crap got together and read about the opium wars, how the British used opium addiction to control the Chinese. Bingo. Start sending hot sales reps to towns up in the hills with wine the doctors haven't seen since med school and crates of OxyContin. They start prescribing it for everything. Doctors know better, but some were in on this too. The epidemic grows to the point that the medical system is strained. Story 12. In August of 1994, a small Washington town was subjected to biological testing by the US government. Over the course of 3 weeks, they had 6 rainstorms that consisted of gelatinous blobs. Anyone that came in physical contact with them, even with latex gloves, became ill with dizziness, nausea, and other symptoms. Originally, the town's doctor diagnosed almost everyone with ear infections. After finally getting someone to agree to test the blobs, they found white blood cells and bacteria in them. Everything from a water spout picking up jellyfish and dropping them on the town, to the possibility of it being from an illegal dumping of an airplane toilet, have been debunked as not feasible. The Air Force admitted to testing weapons near a coastal town about 50 miles away, and residents are adamant they had an unusual amount of government air traffic leading up to the events. The Air Force denies any involvement, but the residents are almost positive they were the unwilling test subjects in something more sinister than flying jellyfish. Story 13. This is a Mexican one. The Dyatlov Colosio shooting. Colosio was a candidate in the 1994 elections in Mexico. I don't know why people liked him so much, because I wasn't alive. He was a politician, he looked like a game changer. Mexico was in a really good economic condition at that time, and he wanted to fix that, along with a lot of things that had been done until that time by the PRI, which is a political party that has been in power for over 70 years. Unlike any other of that election race, he visited different states that were in a poor condition. Here as where the story starts, the election day here in Mexico is in July 1st, and the political campaign starts in January. Colosio, unlike any other, showed charisma, and really a different perspective of a presidential candidate. The PRI has been a rat's nest for a long time, and the president at that time, Carlos Salinas, had the control of the party. In March 23, 1994, Colosio went to Tijuana to keep promoting his public image. However, he was only with a reduced number of militia members compared to the ones that he usually had during his normal visits to Mexico City. His manager decided not to go to Tijuana, and it was just Colosio and a reduced number of soldiers. During his walk through the town, someone slipped away and shot him in the torso. However, when the body was going to the hospital, there were 2 shots in the torso, so a second person did the second one. The Mexican government said that it was only one assassin, that he managed to shoot him twice. The problem is, Colosio never did a spin move during his plummet, and the second shot was on the other side of the first shot, so how could the assassin do a double shot without a spin move? Story 14. Michael Jordan didn't briefly retire in the 1990s. He was caught gambling and the NBA suspended him. The heads of the NBA agreed to let him say it was a retirement he'd come out of because he was a hero to the fans and responsible for large amounts of revenue coming into the league. Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the Chicago Bulls, also owned the Chicago White Sox. He arranged for Jordan to try out and join the Sox so he'd stay in training and remain competitive during his retirement, so he'd be physically ready to come back to basketball when his suspension was over. It's well known today that Jordan is a heavy gambler, and his gambling may have played a role in the disillusionment of his first marriage. Story 15. The Dyatlov Pass incident wasn't actually a natural accident. Something ended them. The amount of radiation in their blood certainly couldn't have been from just passing through an area with radiation whilst they were traveling, could it? And to die with their tongues ripped out, and other such fatalities. It seems very odd the government would label it as death by natural causes, especially when the camp they were at was left rapidly. The radiation wasn't in the blood, it was on their clothes, which can be explained that 2 of the students worked in the university's nuclear lab. There is a great video on a natural cause that completely changed my mind on the whole situation, which involves flash cooling, and it parallels a similar experience of some Swedish people, where all but one died, and he only survived due to where he collapsed. Story 16. The lab leak hypothesis isn't that crazy, it's just a malicious explanation where a natural one is possible, and that attracts people with paranoid attitudes. I have a degree in biochem, and I've worked in places that could afford to be a lot more careful with samples. Can't count how many times I passed a sleeve in the air above a petri dish and invisibly ruined my own experiment, which you don't figure out until days later when something unwanted grows. If you look at the genetic code of SARS-2, it is very weird that a furin cleavage site showed up out of nowhere compared to the virus's nearest relatives, which have no furin cleavage site, but that furin site could easily be engineered in, copying the functions of other viruses. And that's an experiment arguably worth doing, since it makes the virus more infectious to more types of tissue. Study this means of infection, maybe learn to disrupt it. There's also a sequence in the SARS-2 genome that is conventionally used as a tag in lab to quickly sort whether a substance is part of the right sample. 2 arginines that are coded for in a way that does not often occur in nature. There was a lab near the initial outbreak doing gain-of-function research on this virus's nearest relatives. It's quite possible that a well-meaning PI engineered something for the purpose of studying it, to defend against it should it arise naturally. Then somebody's hair or sleeve or shoe sole came into contact, and boom. Story 17. The Titanic didn't sink, the Olympics did. The story goes that after a disastrous maiden voyage of the Olympic, it would cost millions to repair in a time where $1 million was a lot of money. Its sister ship, Titanic, was still being built, so they hatched an insurance fraud scam. They swapped the nameplates between the 2 ships, labeled the Olympic as the Titanic, and set sail. They planned to take damage to the ship, have a nearby ship save everyone, collect the insurance money, and party hard. Except there was a small boat illegally doing stuff in between the Titanic or Olympic, so when the Titanic and Olympic sent up flares for help, the other ship responded instead of the planned one, causing the messages to become confused, so the ship that was sent to save everyone was late and a lot of people died. Story 18. That there was an advanced global civilization before our own that got wiped out by some catastrophe, or that there have been multiple but they all get destroyed with catastrophes which occur in a cycle. To me at least, it is quite believable. It wouldn't take nature very long to completely overrun everything that we have built if we went extinct. All that would remain are odd things like pyramids or some stone structures. So what would be so weird about it happening many times before? Plato's Timaeus is pretty freaking bizarre. In the dialogue, Socrates insists that what he is saying is true, and he explains that in a meeting between Solon and some Egyptian priests that says, the priests report that there have been many civilizations which have been destroyed by many catastrophes. He goes on to describe Atlantis, but what is truly remarkable about this dialogue is not Atlantis, but Plato's description of a continent on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, which itself leads to another ocean on the other side of the world. This has to be the Americas in the Pacific Ocean, but how could he have even imagined that? It's chilling. Story 19. I know this isn't as concrete and eventful as some of the previous comments, but the simulation hypothesis. Hypothetically, a species could become so advanced to the point at which it can simulate the universe down to the subatomic particle, and eventually a chain of simulations forms as the simulation develops simulation technology sufficiently advanced to do so. Since we can't simulate a universe that accurately yet, we're either the original universe and this hypothesis is bogus, or we're the most recent in the chain and are going to continue the chain in our future. Since our computer tech is still advancing, I think there's no reason to assume that we can't begin or continue the chain. I guess the only way to disprove this hypothesis would be to find some way to prove that the universe can't be simulated so perfectly. Story 20. Not much of a conspiracy, but a deranged theory I have is that the whales are secretly biding their time before they wage an all-out war on us. Despite being able to absolutely body us, and having displayed a liking to play with their food and even hunt for sport, there aren't any reported deaths via wild whales, only whales that have been captured. We've tread the same water with them for hundreds of years, and hunted them to light our fires. But despite being intelligent and cruel enough to toy with their prey, they decide to let us go free. No, they're waiting for the perfect moment when they can strike a major blow to humanity in one fell swoop. And with global warming, I'm sure the whale blitz comes ever closer on the horizon. Story 21, that India as a country didn't win independence from the British because of Gandhiji's non-violent struggle movement. It was because Subhash Chandra Bose had mobilized 500k strong Indian army to revolt against 100 cold British army, which included many Indian members, in 1946 to defeat them, whilst also seeking some kind of help from the Soviet Union. I'm pretty sure as F that the colonizers and imperialists did not magically soften their hearts over Indians' non-violent ideals and self-reliant thinking and just say, okay, it was fun while it lasted, and leave the country peacefully without asking for anything in return from the country they looted and pillaged for over 200 years. They didn't want a humiliating end or loss at the hands of a third world country, which wouldn't augment well with their kingdom and its authority. Story 22. Dr. Homi J. Bhabha, the lead nuclear scientist behind the nuclear program of India, was conducting studies on successfully using thorium, another very popular radioactive element in nuclear reactors, in a very efficient way. In 1966, he announced he had successfully made a way to use thorium effectively and efficiently and was preparing to test it. Supposedly the same week he died in an airplane crash when traveling to Switzerland. The airplane crash was no accident, but was purposely arranged by the CIA in order to sabotage India's nuclear capabilities. As India had tremendous natural reserves of thorium, it would have made India more powerful and mighty at that time, which apparently the USA clearly didn't want. Story 23. Bigfoot. Let's be honest, is it really that crazy that a species of monkey or gorilla learned to stand? Bigfoot is simply part of the evolution that branched off somewhere in between gorillas and humans. Why haven't people found one yet? Why don't you go search thousands of miles of Earth? I had a professor explain to me that the reason he doesn't think Bigfoot could exist is that a mammal that size, even just small monkey size, would have a noticeable impact on its environment. Plus, the ecosystems in wooded America don't really have the necessary net primary productivity to fuel something of that size and diet, and if an animal such as that wanted to sufficiently reproduce and maintain population numbers, there would need to be a lot of them, considering how primates have such few offspring, which would mean they'd need even more energy and be even easier to discover. Not to mention that feces footprints and carcasses are usually much more prevalent and easy to find than the actual animal, and none of those have ever been found. Story 24. I have a hard time believing in large-scale conspiracy theories overall. With some of these theories, the amount of cover-up and the amount of people involved, and it has managed to stay quiet and covered up so easily. How do you keep so many people so quiet for so long? With so many people that love attention and their 15 minutes of fame, it seems hard to fathom. Infidelity initially only involves two people and yet often comes to light so easily because one of the two talked. I'm not saying they do not exist per se. I'm just saying the theories that are decades in the making seem to lose the logical sense that keeping something hush-hush for so long would become a rather tedious task to keep quiet. The amount of cover-up to not become overly suspicious is mind-boggling. Story 25. The majority of Venezuelans support Maduro and hate Guaido because he is a US puppet who wants to privatize Venezuelan oil, which is the largest oil reserve in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia, whereas Maduro wants the oil to remain in control of the government, which is why America is so adamant in overthrowing Maduro and putting in Guaido, because it will give them access to the precious Venezuelan oil. Mainstream media who are in the pockets of the US establishment continue to push ridiculous conspiracy theories about Venezuelan supermarkets being empty, when on the ground independent reporters completely refute that story. The media also used photos of a national celebration parade and claimed that it was a protest against Maduro. Venezuela was on the news 24/7, but when the US political pressure failed and Maduro remained in power, all coverage of Venezuela completely stopped, and so we are currently at a stage where the United States is considering what the next step should be. If you ask me, it would be a false flag event that would force the United States to invade Venezuela and overthrow Maduro, because that is the tactic they have used for the past 50 years, all across Latin America and the Middle East. Story 26. That there is only one political party, USA, and it is definitely under God. I was watching a Netflix doc called The Family. Long story short, it is about our politicians on both sides being in cahoots with each other. All of them. I get it is speculative, but I honestly believe it. How do you control a country? Split it in half. Two-party system. I honestly don't understand why the Republicans and Democrats get to debate one another, while our third party, independent, isn't allowed there. We stigmatize the Green Party as a waste vote, but when Trump vs. Clinton happened, we messed up. We did have the lesser of two evils, but individuality is taken away from us with subtle propaganda. You're just wasting your vote is what you hear, and look at us now. Wasted votes because of a simple sentence uttered like it has been written in stone. Story 27. Well, since there's only conspiracies about USA, UK, and a few other countries, I thought I should share the only actual conspiracy about Portugal. Before the Treaty of Torrijos, 1494, the treaty that made half of the world that wasn't discovered belonged to Spain or Portugal. Till 370 leguas, the territory belonged to Portugal. After 370 leguas, the territory belonged to Spain. Portugal already knew about the existence of Brazil, and that's why Portugal asked to extend the territory to the west, so that Portugal could have the land it had already discovered. Because let's be honest, nobody will deviate so much from the path to India without noticing it. The sailors Portugal had were the best of their time, and there's no way they would accidentally make that mistake and find Brazil. Story 28. If you are a space nerd or someone who likes to read about alien life and all extraterrestrial stuff like that, I really think you should read about the Drake equation and Fermi paradox. Basically, the Drake equation is an equation with simple multiplication, which helps us determine how many planets have a chance for life to exist on them. If I remember correctly, the number of planets that could have potential life through the Drake equation were around 63,000. As 63,000 is a huge number, the scientist Enrico Fermi basically thought, where are the aliens at? Because if 63,000 planets have the potential to support life, why is there such a lack of extraterrestrial evidence? If this piques your interest, I'm sure you'll love to read about the great filters and potential ends of the world that are related to the Fermi paradox. Story 29. Okay, so as a former Navy nuclear weapon, a person who has actually worked on and studied these devices, most of you are speaking out your internet butts. 1. The actual engineering and technology that is required is very difficult. 2. It's easy to say, easy to make if you haven't actually worked with this tech, and in current tech is very advanced. Also, just because old blueprints are accessible doesn't make it easy. 3. Getting high-grade fissionable material capable of more than some weak dirty bomb would be impossible for any of you and get you either ended or incarcerated forever in a federal facility. 4. I can absolutely guarantee that the phrase, "it is easy to do you just," has put you in view of several highly efficient government investigative organizations, even if you think you are not and the VPN and filtering you use protects you. These public servants take the threat of nuclear proliferation very seriously and certainly don't suffer fools lightly. Discussing such a subject in public can have bad consequences. I suggest trite comments on your supposed nuclear engineering ability be avoided. Story 30. The Hollow Earth Theory, that there are inner Earth civilizations with water, land, and intelligent life inside both poles of the Earth. NASA has tons of images of the poles with visible edited gray clouds blotting out the poles, and no planes are allowed to come within a certain distance of the poles. There's images of unregistered NASA satellite photos of the poles having holes in all the other planets too. The Kola Super Deep Borehole and 2014 geophysicists both proved there was water several miles under the Earth's crust. There are many historical stories from China, India, Egypt, etc., and the Green Kids from Woolpit all have the stories of people who went to this blissful underground land. People like Olaf Jensen, James Forrester, and other famous people who spoke up about it have all been sent to mental hospitals. Admiral Richard Byrd led missions to the poles and recorded seeing advanced technological cities in the most peaceful land within the pole and talked about it on TV and newspapers, and were quickly diminished by the government. The Reich and the Germans were also obsessed with going inside the poles and before World War II and led exhibitions to the poles, and his men notified to reach the land and didn't want to come back. And after the war, he and a million others mysteriously disappeared. Operation High Jump was to create a military headquarters in Antarctica, but needed 33 aircrafts, 13 Navy ships, and thousands of soldiers, and somehow led to loss of lives. It was later leaked that the mission was to retrieve the missing Germans, and they were attacked by numerous flying saucers coming from the pole and required emergency evacuation. Ever since the story was told, it was immediately classified from the public. Story 31, Lyme disease, was invented by the US government. To summarize, there was a German doctor that specialized in developing infectious disease in insects to be released in Russia with the intention of ending off livestock. Like many German doctors and scientists, he went to work for the US government after the war. He worked at Plum Island, which is a government testing center on an island right off the northeastern tip of Long Island. The work that goes on at Plum Island involves animals and infectious disease. The first places the Lyme disease was discovered is Lyme, Connecticut, and Orient Point, Long Island, the two closest points to Plum Island. All of this information then combined with the fact that the government refused to recognize Lyme disease as a real disease for many years, even after it was generally recognized by the medical community, makes me believe that this conspiracy theory is true. The US government spent decades trying to prove that people suffering from the potentially deadly disease were experiencing nothing more than mental illness. Story 32. This is looking more and more true all the time. If I was China and wanted to soon be the largest economy on Earth, I would create a virus that I could easily control with a communist-style lockdown and release it. All this knowing that the capitalist and democratic countries I'm competing against would likely have far greater magnitudes of deaths due to being unable to convince the majority of their population to participate in public health initiatives designed to protect them out of fear their freedoms were being infringed upon. Just saying. Story 33. This is one I came up with on my own while I was working at a Ford dealership. American automakers were deliberately exaggerating the demand for larger SUV vehicles. In the early 2000s, small economic cars were almost absent from American auto producers, and they kept justifying it by saying over and over, "We make big because big is what everyone wants." I don't have access to a multi-million-dollar market research, but when I worked at a Ford dealership, big is definitely not what everyone wanted. The dealer wanted us to sell big, that was for certain. I remember my employee training focused a great deal on talking the customer into buying a size up. If they wanted a Ford Explorer, talk them into buying an Expedition. If they want an Expedition, talk them into buying an Excursion. If they wanted an Excursion, talk them into buying a converted L-Series big rig, because obviously they have money to burn. The whole time I worked at that Ford dealership, we could not sell a single Ford Explorer, mainly because they're huge gas-guzzling mobiles. During that same time, if we ever had a used car on the lot that was a popular small hatchback, like a Honda Civic, Volkswagen Golf, or even a Geo Metro for God's sake, that car was sold in a day. People were so desperate for smaller vehicles, one customer looking for a small family car wound up buying a 3-liter Mustang, the most unfamily-friendly car on the planet. I hope your kids don't take up hockey. There's no way that car can carry all that gear. And every damn time I sold a smaller car, the manager would give me crap for not selling them the Explorer. Well, nobody wants a thing, and I don't blame them. Story 34. Omar Torrijos, a popular and mostly liked dictator in Panama in the late 70s and early 80s, was most likely assassinated by the CIA in order to put a confirmed CIA accomplice, Manuel Noriega, into power as a dictator. His plane vanished from radar suddenly on a routine flight during some light weather and was later found crashed with no survivors. This is also coupled with the fact the US was accused in court of trying to assassinate him several times, which the US refused to allow as evidence since it violated the Classified Information Procedures Act. To this day, the relevant information has never been declassified. Story 35. The monarchy took out Diana. Although not as powerful as she used to be, the power to have her gone is probably still there. She is incredibly wealthy and immune to prosecution, same with her son. Plus, the monarchy has motivation as well. Charles and Diana were both having affairs, and he would have likely wanted to leave the marriage, whereas I feel Diana, for the sake of her kids, wouldn't have been as comfortable leaving without a fuss, especially when she would have been in a custody battle with an actual prince and future king.